HOA. Karen just declared my private road public easement. No vote, no ask, just her clipboard and smirk.
It's for the community now, or trade. Open it or else.
I look her dead in the eye.
Show me the deed where I gave it away.
Don't need your permission. Unlock it today.
So I grab the chain on my new matte black steel gate. Grandpa's road, my land. Click, padlock slams shut. 60 neighbors locked out. She screams, "You'll pay for this." Nah, they pay when they cross the wrong man. Your road, your legacy, would you lock 'em out? Drop hell yes below. I read 'em all. Where you watching? Drop your city. Like if HOA ever tried stealing yours. This fight's just starting. My name is Colt Briggs, and I grew up on 14 acres in rural central Ohio. Not wealthy land, not pretty land in any magazine cover kind of way, but ours land. My grandfather, a man named Earl Briggs, who smelled perpetually of motor oil and black coffee, bought those acres in 1961 when this whole corner of Harwick County was nothing but second-growth timber and creek mud. He built the house himself, wood frame, poured concrete basement, and he cut the road himself too. 3/8 of a mile of packed gravel, carved out of the tree line, running from County Route 14 all the way back to what he called the flat, where the house sat. That road was his, always private, deeded private, recorded at the county courthouse, right there in black ink, going on 60 years. When Earl died, the land passed to my father. When my father died of a heart attack at 62, stress and cigarettes and a life of hard work, it passed to me. I was 34. I moved back home, started a small excavation business out of a pole barn behind the house, and figured I would spend the next 30 years doing exactly what my grandfather had done, minding my business on my own land. Then the Harwick Pines residential community got incorporated. See, the county had approved a subdivision development in the late 90s, a cluster of 64 homes carved out of the land adjacent to mine. Nice enough houses, 2-car garages, those vinyl shutters that are just decorative, and everybody knows it. The development had its own entrance off the main road, its own asphalt loop, its own little HOA with its own little rule book. Fine. None of that had anything to do with me, except that the developer, a guy named Preston Haverford, who is currently living very comfortably in Scottsdale and never has to answer for anything, had made a quiet arrangement with the original HOA board. My gravel road, running parallel to the subdivision's back fence line, was apparently convenient for residents who wanted a shortcut to the county route. Haverford had verbally assured early buyers they could use it. No paperwork, no easement filed, no conversation with me, just a handshake deal between a developer and 60 strangers about property that belonged to my dead father. For years, people had just used it, cut through. I'd wave them off, put up a sign. They'd ignore it. I was busy. I was building a business. And honestly, I kept assuming someone would eventually just do the right thing and stop trespassing. That was my first mistake. Then Renata Voss became HOA president. Renata was, how do I put this charitably, a woman who had found her calling. Retired from some mid-level HR position at an insurance company in Columbus, moved out to Harwick Pines with her husband Gerald, who mostly seemed to exist in the background of her life, nodding supportively, and within 2 years had taken over the HOA board with the energy of a 5-star general given command of a church bake sale. She wore lanyards. She had a Robert's Rules of Order binder with color-coded tabs. She sent email newsletters with subject lines like, "Community Standards Update. Please read before trash day." And in the spring of the year I'm about to tell you about, Renata Voss looked at my grandfather's private road and saw an opportunity. The HOA voted, at a meeting I was not invited to, about property I owned, to formally designate my gravel road as a community access easement. They recorded the language in their own HOA governing documents. They sent a letter, not asking, informing, that the road was now considered a shared community asset, and that any attempt to restrict access would be addressed through appropriate legal channels. I read that letter twice. Then I called my attorney. My attorney, a compact, plain-spoken woman named Harriet Sloan, who has been practicing property law in Ohio for 26 years and does not suffer fools in any zip code, took one look at the HOA's letter, and made a sound I can only describe as a short, amused exhale through her nose. "They recorded this in their own HOA documents," she said. "That's what it says. Their HOA documents, not the county, not a court, their newsletter binder. Apparently." She leaned back. "Colt, this letter is not a legal instrument. It's a strongly worded opinion. They have no easement. There is no prescriptive easement language that would hold here. The use has never been open, notorious, hostile, or continuous in the legal sense. Your grandfather put up signs. You've put up signs. The use has been permissive at best, which actually works against any prescriptive claim." She paused. "Send them a cease and desist. Certified mail. Return receipt." We did. Harriet drafted it. 3 tight paragraphs, no adjectives, no emotion, just statute numbers and property descriptions, and a clear statement that any further attempt to treat the road as a shared easement would result in legal action. I signed it. We sent it. That was a Thursday. By Monday morning, Renata had responded. Her letter, which ran to 4 pages and included 2 highlighted attachments and a printed-out Ohio Real Property Code section that she had, I want to be clear, completely misread, claimed that the community had been using the road for over 20 years, that this constituted a prescriptive easement under Ohio law, and that any attempt to restrict access would be met with a civil injunction. I want to explain what prescriptive easement actually means, because Renata was counting on nobody knowing. A prescriptive easement in Ohio requires that the use of another person's property be open, continuous, adverse, and hostile for a period of 21 years. The key word is adverse, meaning the user is claiming a right that the property owner disputes. If an owner permits use, puts up a sign, waves people off, gives informal permission, that use is not adverse. It's tolerated. Tolerated use cannot ripen into a legal easement. Takeaway: permissive use kills prescriptive easement claims. Harriet wrote back explaining this in 1 clear paragraph. Renata ignored the explanation and filed a complaint with the county zoning board, claiming I was creating a public safety hazard by refusing community access to an established roadway. Meanwhile, and this is where it starts to get genuinely absurd, residents were still using the road every single morning. I could hear them from inside my kitchen. The crunch of gravel under tires starting around 6:45, the diesel rumble of a couple of trucks, the wet leaf smell from the tree line mixing with exhaust fumes. Every morning, like they'd already won. I called the county sheriff's office, filed a formal trespass complaint. An officer would need to come out, I was told, observe the trespass, and issue warnings. The deputy who showed up was a young guy named Braddock. Clean uniform, polite enough, clipboard in hand. He walked the road with me. I showed him my deed documentation, explained the situation. He nodded along attentively. And then he told me that the situation was civil in nature, and that he'd pass along the complaint, but couldn't issue trespass warnings without the county prosecutor's involvement. I asked him how he knew Renata Voss. He paused just a half-second too long. "She lives 3 houses down from me, sir." I thanked him for his time. So, the attorney's letters weren't stopping anyone. The sheriff wasn't going to help. The zoning board complaint was going to take 6 months to schedule. And every morning, like a small daily insult, I could hear 60 sets of tires rolling across my grandfather's gravel. There is a particular kind of frustration that isn't hot-headed anger. It's colder than that. It's the feeling of watching a slow flood and realizing that the people with the sandbags aren't coming, that you're going to have to build the levee yourself, and that when you do, everyone is going to act like you're the problem. I started making a list. The invoice arrived on a Tuesday, which I have now come to regard as Renata's preferred day for delivering audacity. It was printed on HOA letterhead, Harwick Pines Residential Community, embossed logo, everything, and it itemized, with a straight face, $340 in road maintenance and shared infrastructure fees for the calendar year, payable within 30 days. $340 for my road that she was trespassing on. I framed it. It's hanging in my pole barn next to a photo of my grandfather breaking ground. I show it to everyone who comes by. It never stops being funny. But Renata wasn't done. She had apparently decided that the cease and desist and the civil complaint were speed bumps, not walls, and that what the situation needed was not less aggression, but more community spirit. So one Saturday morning in early June, I looked out my kitchen window and watched approximately 12 Harwick Pines residents, some in gardening gloves, one in a sun hat, trooping down my road with flats of marigolds, a bag of cedar mulch, and a hand-painted wooden sign that read, in cheerful blue letters, Harwick Pines Community Path. They planted marigolds along the road's edge. They laid mulch. They drove the sign into the ground like a flag on a conquered hill. I gave them 45 minutes to finish, because I respect a person's ability to commit fully to a mistake. Then I got on my tractor. I pulled the sign out of the ground, roots and all, the cedar post making a sound like a champagne cork, loaded it into my truck bed, photographed everything with timestamps, and called Harriet. The marigolds I left because honestly they looked fine and they hadn't done anything wrong. The mulch stayed too. The sign went to Harriet's office as exhibit evidence in the civil trespass case we were now actively building. Here is where the ground started to shift, though, because not everyone in Harwick Pines was on Renata's side. That same week, I got 3 separate phone calls from subdivision residents who had seen the community beautification stunt and were, to put it mildly, not thrilled. A retired high school football coach named Warren Steck called to tell me he'd voted against the road designation from the beginning and had the meeting minutes to prove it. A woman named Dolores Farr, 50s, sharp, worked in county land records, called to say she'd looked up my deed and thought Renata was playing a very dangerous game. And a younger guy named Fetch Calloway, who owned a landscaping business, called to apologize for his wife having participated in the marigold event without understanding the full situation. These 3 phone calls mattered more than they seemed at the time. I took notes. Meanwhile, I'd installed 2 trail cameras, the kind hunters use, motion-activated, weatherproof, at either end of the road. Within 2 weeks, I had logged 847 separate vehicle transits, license plates, timestamps, a full visual record of ongoing continuous trespass across documented private property. Harriet was pleased. "You're building a very clean case," she said. "I'm not just building a case," I told her. "I'm building a gate." She paused. "A literal gate?" "The most literal gate you've ever seen." She was quiet for a moment. "Just make sure you have your property lines surveyed first." That was actually excellent advice. I want to talk about the emergency vehicle gambit because it was Renata's smartest move and almost worked. She posted in the Harwick Pines Facebook group, a group I was not in, but Dolores Farr was, and she screenshotted everything with the methodical loyalty of a person who has worked in records her entire life, claiming that Colt Briggs was planning to block the only secondary emergency access route to the subdivision, that if there was a fire or a medical emergency and the main entrance was blocked, ambulances and fire trucks would have no alternative route, that children could die, that Colt was choosing his property dispute over community safety. Now, this was a lie, but it was a well-constructed lie because it contained just enough geographic plausibility that people who didn't know better would believe it. The local fire chief, a decent man named Horace Tuttle, who had been with Harwick County Fire and Rescue for 22 years, received enough calls from anxious residents that he felt obligated to reach out to me directly. He was apologetic about it, made clear he was just doing due diligence, and asked if I could clarify the situation. I could. I sent Chief Tuttle a packet. In it, the county's official emergency vehicle routing maps, which showed 2 certified access routes to Harwick Pines, neither of which was my road, a copy of my deed, a letter from my attorney, a note explaining that my road was not on any county emergency access plan, had never been designated as such, and that any claim otherwise was factually incorrect and demonstrably so. Chief Tuttle called me back the next morning. "Mr. Briggs," he said, "I appreciate the thoroughness. I'll be sending a clarifying communication to the residents." He paused. "Whoever told them this wasn't being straight with them." "No, sir," I said. "They were not." Takeaway: always check whether a claimed emergency access route is actually recorded with the county fire marshal, because if it isn't recorded, it doesn't exist legally. But Renata had already moved the goalposts before Tuttle's clarification even went out. Her new target was the County Planning Commission. She had submitted a formal petition requesting that the county initiate an eminent domain proceeding to take my road as a public necessity easement. the argument being that the community had come to depend on it, and that the public interest outweighed my private property rights. This was the most serious legal threat yet, and it was the moment I asked Harriet to pull the Planning Commission membership list. Gerald Voss, Renata's husband, had been appointed to the Harwick County Planning Commission 14 months earlier. He sat on the subcommittee that would review exactly this kind of petition. I asked Harriet if that was a problem. She made that little amused exhale again. "It's a conflict of interest," she said, "and depending on whether Gerald discloses it before any vote, it could be grounds to void any decision made by that subcommittee." I had my surveyor out the next morning. He drove stakes along the full length of the road's legal boundary. Thunk, thunk, thunk into the soft Ohio clay, the smell of turned earth rising in the cool morning air. Each stake a small red flag marking exactly where my property ended and the world began. Official, recorded, undeniable. The survey cost me $800. It was the best $800 I have ever spent. The call came on a Thursday evening, which I now consider a better day than Tuesday. Dolores Farr's voice had the controlled steadiness of someone who has found something significant and is choosing her words carefully. "Colt," she said, "I've been going through the original subdivision approval file from 1997, the one for Harwick Pines. I have access to these records through my job. This is all public record, nothing I'm not supposed to see." "Okay," I said. "There was a condition on the development approval," she said. "The county required Preston Haverford to provide a certified secondary vehicle access route to the subdivision before final plat approval. It's right there in the approval letter, Condition 7C. I sat down at my kitchen table. "He submitted a compliance affidavit in 1998, Dolores continued. Said the secondary access was in place. County signed off. Final plat recorded. 64 homes built and sold. What did he list as the secondary access?" A pause. "A private gravel road running along the subdivision's eastern border, listed with your grandfather's parcel number." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, through the window, I could see the last light going down over the tree line, the kind of October dusk that turns the sky the color of a bruise. "He used my grandfather's road," I said, "without an easement, without consent, without any legal instrument whatsoever." Dolores's voice had gone flat in the way that people who deal with paperwork go flat when they encounter something genuinely outrageous. "He told the county it was an established community access route. He sold 64 homes on that representation, and none of it was true." Let me translate what this meant in plain terms. Preston Haverford had obtained final subdivision approval by falsely representing that he had secured secondary access, and he had done so using my grandfather's private road without any legal right to it. This was not a gray area. This was a developer fraudulently satisfying a regulatory condition using someone else's property. Every home in Harwick Pines had been sold with an implicit representation, built on that fraudulent approval. That secondary access existed, and the HOA's entire claim to my road wasn't ancient community tradition. It was a house of cards, built on one dishonest affidavit filed by a man who was now poolside in Arizona. Takeaway: original subdivision approval conditions are public record, and if a developer fraudulently satisfied those conditions using your private property, every subsequent community use claim inherits that fraud. I asked Dolores one more question. "Does Gerald Voss have access to the original development files through the Planning Commission?" A longer pause this time. "He'd have had access since he was appointed," she said carefully. "Standard commission member access." Which meant Gerald Voss, possibly, had known what his wife was fighting for all along. I called Harriet at 8:30 that night. She listened without interrupting for 4 minutes straight, which is the longest I have ever heard her go without talking. Then she said, "Colt, go buy yourself a very good gate. Here is the thing about revenge, and I want to be honest about this because I don't love that word. The thing about correcting an injustice is that it works best when it's thorough, not hot, not reactive, just thorough. I spent 3 weeks building what Harriet and I started calling the package. The legal piece came first because it had the longest runway. Harriet filed an amended civil complaint in county court that now included fraud-related civil claims tied directly to Haverford's 1998 affidavit. We weren't suing Haverford. He was in Arizona, and this would take years. but we were creating a documented legal record establishing that the HOA's claimed easement rights traced directly to a fraudulent development approval. That record would matter. Simultaneously, Harriet drafted a formal conflict of interest disclosure, addressed to the full Harwick County Planning Commission and the County Attorney's Office, identifying Gerald Voss's role on the commission, his marital relationship to the HOA president currently petitioning for county intervention on the road matter, and requesting that Gerald recuse himself from any related deliberations, and that any actions taken by the subcommittee while Gerald was a member be reviewed for procedural validity. This letter went out certified mail, with a copy to the local newspaper's county desk. Then we sent the HOA a demand letter, separate from the lawsuit, direct and unambiguous, requiring them to formally rescind the community easement designation from their governing documents within 30 days, or face an expanded civil action that would include punitive damages tied to the fraud lineage. Moore Steck pulled his meeting minutes. Turns out that when Renata had called the easement vote, she'd done it at a special session she'd called with less than the required 72-hour notice, a procedural violation of the HOA's own bylaws. The vote, even on its own terms, was invalid. Warren had raised an objection at the meeting, been overruled, and had written it down with the careful documentation of a man who coached defensive line for 30 years and understands that the details matter. His notes became exhibits. Dolores had already pulled and certified copies of every relevant county document: the 1997 approval letter, the 1998 compliance affidavit, the plat recording, the Planning Commission appointment records for Gerald. She organized them in a binder with labeled tabs. It was, frankly, a better organized binder than Renata's. I found that satisfying. Fetch Calloway, who by this point had become genuinely invested in the outcome, helped me spend a Saturday walking the surveyed property line and confirming the exact placement for the gate. The legal placement had to be precise, at the recorded boundary, not 1 inch inside it, because any ambiguity could be used against us. We flagged it, measured it twice, and marked the post locations with spray paint on the gravel. The morning smelled like cold dirt and the faint sweetness of the dried goldenrod along the fence line. Then I called Dex. Dex Hamill runs a custom fabrication shop out of a metal building off County Route 9, and he is the kind of craftsman who takes mild personal offense at sloppiness in any form. I told him what I needed: a 14-gauge steel double gate, powder-coated black, sized to span the full recorded road width of 16 feet, heavy-duty hinges, a receiver for a padlock, and a small welded panel near the latch side that said, in clean, simple lettering, "Private property, no trespassing, Briggs, Lot 7, Parcel 009-004. Dex looked at the specs and said, "I can have that ready in 10 days. I need it in 7. He looked at me. "You got a date in mind?" "The HOA's deadline runs out on a Thursday." He nodded slowly. "Thursday it is." The financial dimension of this, by the way, was not nothing. The 847 trespass events I documented on trail camera represented real legal exposure for the residents who had participated. In Ohio, civil trespass damages can include actual harm plus statutory fees. I was not planning to sue 60 individual homeowners. That would be exhausting and would make me the villain. But I was going to make very clear in the settlement demand what those numbers looked like. The math was convincing. Numbers often are. The settlement demand I drafted with Harriet came to a simple ask. The HOA formally rescinds the easement designation, removes all signage from my property, pays $12,000 in documented legal fees, and provides a written acknowledgement that the road is private. No admission of fraud required. Clean, simple, final. We gave them 30 days to respond. They did not respond well. Renata's response to the settlement demand was not negotiation. It was warfare conducted through a community newsletter. Within a week of receiving our letter, every homeowner in Harwick Pines got a 3-page document in their mailbox, printed on the same HOA letterhead as the $340 invoice that was still hanging in my pole barn. In it, Renata described me as a bad faith actor pursuing a predatory legal strategy designed to extort the community, claimed that Harriet Sloan operated a firm known for exploiting rural property disputes, and suggested that my real goal was to force the HOA to buy the road at an inflated price. None of this was true. All of it was calculated. The state bar complaint against Harriet was filed the same week, a document accusing her of filing frivolous litigation for financial gain. The bar's professional conduct office reviewed it, found zero merit, and dismissed it in 11 days. But those 11 days cost Harriet time and cost me anxiety, which was the point. Here is where Renata made her second-to-last serious mistake. She contacted the local paper. She apparently assumed that calling the Harwick County Register with a story about a neighbor bullying a community would produce sympathetic coverage. What she got instead was Petra Mosley, 26 years old, 3 years out of Ohio State's journalism program, and the kind of reporter who actually goes to the county records office. Petra called me after she'd spent a day in the records room. Her voice had the careful neutrality of someone who has found more than they expected. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "I've been looking at the 1998 compliance affidavit. I'd like to talk to you and your attorney about the timeline." "Our door is open," I said. We met with Petra for 2 hours. Harriet walked her through the legal chain. Dolores Farr joined us by phone and explained the records she'd found. Warren Steck brought his meeting minutes. Petra took notes with the focused, slightly wide-eyed energy of someone realizing this story was bigger than a neighbor dispute. We asked her to hold publication until we were ready to act. She agreed, contingent on being present for whatever came next. That felt fair. Meanwhile, November had arrived with the kind of Ohio cold that doesn't care how you feel about it, just settles in, gray and permanent, ice crystals on the windshield at 6 a.m., the smell of wood smoke from every chimney on the road. At Dex's shop, I could see the gate taking shape in the back bay, the steel frame upright, the crossbars welded, the powder coat drying a deep matte black that looked, honestly, extraordinary. Then Fetch called me. His voice was tight. "Colt, I just had a meeting with Renata Voss. She offered me the HOA's full landscaping contract, all common areas, spring through fall, if I removed myself from any association with your dispute." Her words. Ohio, for the record, is a one-party consent state for recorded conversations, meaning, if you are part of a conversation, you can legally record it without telling the other person. Fetch had known this, having dealt with a contractor dispute 2 years prior, and had his phone running in his jacket pocket. He emailed me the audio file that afternoon. Harriet listened to it twice. "Attempted witness interference," she said. "Possibly bribery. Definitely something I'm filing with the court." The gate was finished on Wednesday. I picked it up in my truck bed. 14-gauge steel, heavy as consequence, cold to the touch in the November air. Dex had even added a small detail I hadn't asked for. A laser-cut outline of Ohio on the crossbar. Subtle, just because he said it needed a little something. It did. The night before, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I had my grandfather's original deed out, the actual paper document, not a photocopy. The kind of paper that's thick and slightly waxy with age. The kind that smells faintly of old wood and something metallic that I've never been able to name. Earl Briggs, his signature in blue ballpoint, 1961. The notary seal embossed in the lower right. The legal description of the land running in that careful, precise language that property records use. Commencing at the iron pin set at the northeast corner of the tract, thence south 42 degrees, 30 minutes west. He had cut that road himself, with a borrowed bulldozer and a hand level, and 60 years of nobody ever questioning that it was his. I folded the deed back into its envelope and went to bed at 9 o'clock. At 4 p.m. Wednesday, Harriet called. Her voice was brisk with the kind of energy that means something has happened, and she's already handling it. Renata filed for an emergency TRO, temporary restraining order, trying to stop the gate installation. Can she get it? I'm walking into the judge's chambers in 10 minutes with the full fraud packet, the conflict of interest filing, the fetch recording, and the surveyed property documentation. A pause. No, she cannot get it. At 5:52 p.m., the TRO was denied. The judge, per Harriet's account, delivered with barely suppressed satisfaction, had looked at the documentation and asked the HOA's newly hired attorney whether his client was aware that her easement claim traced to a fraudulent development affidavit. The attorney had apparently requested a recess to call his client. The TRO was denied. Thursday morning, Fetch and I were at the road at 6 a.m. with post hole diggers, 2 80-pound bags of fast-set concrete per post, and a headlamp each because the sun was not yet interested in participating. The frozen gravel crunched like broken glass under our boots. The air smelled of cold concrete and metal, and the particular pre-dawn stillness of rural Ohio in November. The kind of silence that feels like the world holding its breath. We dug. We set the posts. We poured the concrete and braced them level with scrap lumber while it set. The fast set took 40 minutes in the cold. We stood by the truck with thermoses of coffee, watching the light come up gray and slow through the tree line. At 7:30 we hung the gate, the hinges seated with a solid, definitive weight. The gate swung open, swung closed, swung open. Perfectly balanced. Dex had measured true. At 8:20 I threaded the padlock through the latch. At 8:30 I snapped it shut. That sound, that single, clean, metallic click, was the best sound I had heard in 3 years. At 8:47, a silver SUV came down from the subdivision end, moving at the casual speed of a person who uses this road every morning without thinking about it. It came around the gentle curve in the tree line and stopped. Stopped completely, engine running, in front of a black steel gate that had not existed yesterday. I was standing off to the side, coffee in hand, close enough to see but not in the road. The driver sat there for a full 30 seconds. Then I saw the window roll down and a head lean out, and a person look at the gate, look at the sign. Private property, no trespassing, Briggs, Lot 7, parcel 009-004, and then look around as if the road might have moved. It had not moved. The window went back up. The SUV reversed slowly, back the way it came. I drank my coffee. The Harwick Pines Community Center was a single-story building with fluorescent lights and folding chairs, and the specific atmosphere of a room full of people who are angry in different directions. By 7 p.m. it was packed, 60-some homeowners, most of them people I'd never exchanged a word with, all of them now deeply invested in a road they'd been told they owned. Renata stood at the front table in her lanyard, HO a binder open, looking like a person who had convinced themselves that presence and volume constitute authority. I sat in the third row between Harriet and Fetch. Petra Mosley was against the side wall with a reporter's notebook. Warren Steck was sitting near the front in a way that suggested he had a plan. The first 30 minutes were loud and largely not about me. Residents were angry about the gate, angry about their commutes being disrupted, angry that this had gone so far. Someone used the phrase, hostile neighbor. Someone else suggested a legal fund. Several people looked directly at me while speaking, in a way designed to make me feel small, and I would like to report that it did not work. Then Harriet raised her hand. "I have 5 minutes of factual information relevant to this body's legal exposure," she said. "I'd like to address the room." Renata started to say that this was not an open forum. Warren Steck, who had apparently been waiting for exactly this moment for approximately 18 months, stood up, opened his own binder, cited Section 4.3 of the HOA bylaws. Any landowner whose property interests are materially affected by HOA actions shall be afforded opportunity to speak at any relevant meeting, and very calmly moved to the front of the room and sat down in the chair beside the HOA president's table. Renata looked at him as if he had materialized from the floor. 5 minutes, Warren said to Harriet. "Go ahead." Harriet doesn't do theater. She doesn't pace or perform. She stood up, placed a small stack of documents on the table, and talked for exactly 4 minutes and 50 seconds. She explained the 1998 compliance affidavit and what it had falsely claimed. She explained the chain of reliance, every community use argument built on that fraudulent document. She explained the denied TRO. She explained the recorded witness interference conversation involving Fetch Calloway and described what Ohio courts tended to do with that kind of evidence. She placed Gerald Voss's Planning Commission appointment record on the table and explained the conflict of interest disclosure that had already been filed with the county attorney. She did not raise her voice once. The room had gone completely quiet about 90 seconds in, which, if you've ever been in a room of 60 angry homeowners, is a remarkable thing to witness. Gerald Voss was in the back row. I had been watching him since Harriet started talking. He had gone the color of old printer paper. Renata tried to interrupt 3 times. Warren gavelled her down twice with the flat of his hand on the table, and the third time just looked at her steadily until she stopped. When Harriet finished, she picked up one final document, the settlement demand, and placed it at the center of the table. "This offer has been open for 30 days, she said. "It's still on the table tonight. Formal rescission of the easement designation, removal of all signage from private property, $12,000 in documented legal fees, written acknowledgement that the road is private. If this is signed tonight, all civil actions are suspended and the matter is closed." She paused. "If it is not signed tonight, the Harwick County Register publishes its story Monday morning, and a formal fraud complaint regarding the 1998 development affidavit goes to the Ohio Attorney General's office on Tuesday." Renata said, "You can't—" "Renata," it was Gerald's voice from the back of the room. Quiet. Final. She turned to look at him. He was not looking back at her. The HOA's newly hired attorney leaned over to his client, whispered for about 15 seconds, and then Renata Voss, slowly, with the particular stiffness of someone whose self-narrative is restructuring in real time, picked up the pen. The settlement was signed at 8:14 p.m. Petra Mosley wrote everything down. She ran the story anyway, with Harriet's blessing and mine, because the public record of the 1998 affidavit was always going to be public record. But she ran it as the story it actually was. A 60-year-old family's property rights, a fraudulent developer approval, and a community that had mostly been misled about what they were entitled to. It was a fair story. Renata was not quoted positively in it. Here is what happened after the pen went down. Gerald Voss submitted his resignation from the Harwick County Planning Commission on a quiet Tuesday. There it is again, Tuesday, 14 days after the community meeting. The letter cited personal circumstances requiring reduced outside commitments. The Register ran a 2-inch brief. Dolores Farr read it at her desk, called me, and said, in the tone of a person who considers that adequate. Renata did not run for re-election to the HOA board the following April. Warren Steck was elected president, with 61 votes out of 64 cast. He called me to tell me, and his voice had the quiet satisfaction of a man who had been right for a long time, and was not going to make a big deal of it. The new board's first action was to formally record the road's private status in their own governing documents and post a correction to the community bulletin board. The Ohio Attorney General's office opened an inquiry into the 1998 Haverford compliance affidavit. I was not the complainant, the county was, after the Register story. What happens to Preston Haverford and Scottsdale is now their business, not mine. I have a gate and a settled lawsuit and no particular need to chase a man into his retirement. The gate is still up. It's been up for going on 2 years now. I put a key-coded lock on it after the first winter, simpler than a padlock, more reliable in the cold. And I've given codes to 4 people. Warren Steck, for genuine community communication, the owner of the property directly behind mine who has a legitimate agricultural access need we worked out in a proper recorded agreement. Chief Tuttle, for actual emergencies, not hypothetical ones. And Fetch Calloway, who helped me hang the thing and deserves that much at minimum. The $12,000 in settlement fees, after Harriet's final bill, left me with a small remainder. Dolores Farr had quietly proposed something. The county records office had been trying for years to fund a digitization project, scanning and indexing the historical property records going back to the 1940s, putting them online, making it possible for any landowner in Harwick County to search their own deed history from their kitchen table. Disputes like mine often start, she said, because people can't easily access the records that would tell them the truth. We funded the first phase. It's running now. I'm told it's already been used in 3 other property disputes in the county, twice preventing conflict before it started. And there's one more thing. My grandfather Earl Briggs went to the Harwick County Vocational School, learned machine work there, learned the fabrication skills that helped him build his house, and cut his road, and make something from nothing on 14 Ohio acres. The school still runs trades programs, welding, heavy equipment operation, electrical, good programs, under-resourced ones. I set up a small annual scholarship in his name. It goes to 1 student per year in a trades program, a kid who is building something. The county vocational director called to thank me, and I told her the truth, that a man who smelled like motor oil and black coffee had bought 14 acres in 1961, and that the least I could do was make sure somebody else got the same running start he gave himself. The marigolds along my road came back in the spring, by the way. I left them. They didn't do anything wrong.